Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas. Wacker. With me, as always, we have Cushman, and welcome to our 2021 Formula One season preview episode. It is right around the corner, less than 2 weeks until lights are out in Bahrain for the start of the F1 season, and we've got our predictions and everything to do in today's episode, a special version of the Green Flag here today. This is only going to be Formula One based, and it definitely deserves that, to say the least, after what we've seen in preseason testing, what the anticipations are coming into the season. Drive to Survive is right around the corner as well when you're watching this, about a day out from release, so make sure you go watch that on Netflix. If you haven't watched Formula One before, it is must-see TV. You got to go watch all 3 seasons because it really gives a good behind-the-scenes look into the life of Formula One. But before we get into all of our predictions, how are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing great because we're talking about F1 today, and all of a sudden, with testing done and everything leading up to the season out, it really does feel like it's finally here. For a while, you were hearing all the news, you were getting all the delivery releases, all that kind of stuff, but it really felt like the season was way far away. But with testing now done, Drive to Survive this Friday, and then obviously the race coming up in about a week and a half now, the season's finally here, and it kind of snuck up on me a little bit. It went from feeling like it was months away to all of a sudden a week away, but we're finally here. Super excited for this season. So many new faces and new places, which are going to make for some great storylines this year. So really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we've got our usual categories, or similar to them, what we did with our NASCAR season previews a couple of weeks back when that was starting to get into form, and now that is in full swing with the NASCAR side of things. But Formula One, we'll have some categories. We'll look at the new calendar this year as well. We have some new tracks and some familiar ones making its reappearance on the calendar due to the 2020 calendar being a bit shaken up, to say the least, for obvious reasons. And then we'll look at the constructors in order. We'll go from bottom to top, and we'll do that as well with the driver standings as well. So an action-packed and jam-packed episode in this one, but let's get right into what the calendar is going to look like for the 2021 F1 season. It starts off in Bahrain, as it kind of did with F1 preseason testing that would just happen this past weekend. So Bahrain starts it off obviously in a week and a half time, and then we go to Italy for Imola. It's making its return to the calendar. It was on it last year, hasn't been on the calendar for many years prior to that, but it is making its reappearance again this season after having a pretty successful debut back on the calendar, to say the least. And then we go right back to Portugal as well, a new addition to the Formula One calendar last year. Of course, with all the scheduling issues that we had last year, we had to kind of mix things up, and Portugal definitely surprised us with the amount of entertainment that it had last year. It was definitely a very good Grand Prix. Then we got Spain. As per usual, you can expect what we have with Spain.
Maybe a little different this year because we didn't have preseason testing there, which usually potentially plays into why it's so boring. But it is a very lackluster track in terms of just lack of passing abilities and stuff. But maybe a little bit better this year with the lack of preseason testing and laps logged on that track.
Hopefully. And just to preface this is not finalized or anything like that, because there is the possibility and the likelihood that things are going to be shaken up once again this year with countries having different COVID-19 rulings and whatnot and restrictions. So this is all just for right now. This is all tentative, basically. It's just a week-by-week basis is what Formula One's kind of going by this season. But we got Monaco hopefully back on the calendar this year. It would be so great to see them back in the streets of Monaco because they didn't have that last year. And then it would go along with the greatest kind of weekend with racing with the Indy 500, the Coca-Cola 600, and of course the Monaco Grand Prix to kind of start off the morning there. And then we got Azerbaijan returning with that Grand Prix. Then they come back to North America. Hopefully, we're praying that Canada
is pretty unlikely, but
with Montreal, we're praying for June 11th to the 13th. That would be such a great weekend if we could have Formula One back in North America, and Canada would be the first one over here on this side of the world. Really hopeful. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you want to do, whatever your superstition is, hopefully that this is a Grand Prix that we will see this year. And then we have France returning once again, and then Austria. That's what opened the season last time out, if you remember. 2 weekends there for the Styria Grand Prix. Of course, the Austrian Grand Prix had 2 really good races last year. Austria always delivers a really good race for Formula One. We also have the British Grand Prix in about mid-July there, so that's going to be a fun one. And then we go to Hungary once again. That was on the calendar last year. And then we have our summer break after Hungary, the usual summer stint there. And then we return to Spa in Belgium on the last weekend of August. Netherlands makes its debut for the Formula One calendar. Was meant to be on it last season. did not actually end up happening. We have it hopefully back this time around. Then we go back to Italy once again, but this time we go to the usual suspect here in Italy. It's going to be one heck of a Grand Prix there. Remember, Pierre Gasly won this race last time out. So I'm expecting big things out of the Italian Grand Prix, the second edition, if you want to call it that, later this year. And then we have Russia. Yeah, as per whatever you want to call it, but it's not going to be, what are they going to call it? Because they can't call it really Russia because it is under the current doping
I don't know
allegations.
if it files under the WADA stuff because it's individual athletes, not the country. So I don't know what weird stuff you got going on there, but because I think that also applied last year, but I guess it didn't because Kvyat was able to run under the Russian flag. So who knows what they're going to do for that one? Maybe you have to come up with a fun name for that one or something.
It's not going to be the NASCAR race at Kansas, hopefully, that name. If I don't know if you saw that or not with Bush's sponsoring it. It's not going to be anything that weird, but nonetheless, Singapore, we're going to maybe go back to Asia this year. Fingers crossed, hopefully.
I think that one's more likely than at least the first Canadian Grand Prix. I think US, Mexico late in the year is fairly likely. Asia will still see about, but I think that they have higher hopes to return there later in the year than maybe something early on, like a North American trip in July, like for Canada there.
Yeah, and then after Singapore, we go to Japan, hopefully there at Suzuka. That would be obviously a great sight to see them back on the calendar this year. Then we have obviously the American Grand Prix there in the United States in Texas, Mexico, then Brazil, and then a weirdly scheduled Australian Grand Prix in the middle to late part of November. Obviously, that is traditionally the season opener.
Brutal race for the drivers because, of course, that's getting closer to that's getting right into summertime in Australia where it's peak temperatures and stuff. So if we do get to go to Australia there, hopefully we do, because Albert Park is always a fun race. Usually the season opener hasn't been the last year, of course, for certain reasons. But hopefully we get there later in the season and see what a very different race, a November race would be in Australia.
Definitely. And then we have the two final ones there. Saudi Arabia on the calendar this year for its debut. We'll see what the layout is on that track. We haven't found out anything regarding those details yet. And then Abu Dhabi as well, just to finish it off the season there on the December 10th to 12th.
1-2 punch at the end of the season, hey?
Yeah. Oh, man, I cannot wait for that. But, I mean, hopefully there's a championship battle to keep us entertained during those races because we'll see what happens with the actual on-track product as we've seen in years past on how well, specifically Abu Dhabi, we don't know what to expect with Saudi Arabia, but nonetheless, it is a bit of a controversial one to say the least on the calendar. But that's the F1 2021 schedule for this season tentatively. Obviously, we'll see what happens from here on out. But we have our categories to get into here, Kyle, before we look at the actual running order of the constructors and drivers standings. So we got most wins, underdog winner pick if you have one, surprise driver of the year, biggest disappointment, bounce back driver of the year, total podium finishers, and then as well rookie of the year is going to be a fun one as well. Just there's only 3 rookies in the field this time around, so you can kind of guess where we're going to go on that one, but nonetheless it's still going to be fun. And then of course we're going to have the champion to kind of round it out, but that'll be for the drivers championship when we release those. But do you want to kick us off here, Kyle, with the most wins for the season? We'll start out big.
Sure. I'm going to say George Russell. No, of course. It's Lewis Hamilton who gets the most wins this year. It's just a matter of how many he gets this year. And last year, what was it? 11 of 17 he won or something like that?
I think it was like 10. I think it was 10. He was close.
Something
11 or 10,
something like that. 10, 11. And in the 16 races, of course, he ran because that little fun one in Secure. But most wins, Lewis Hamilton. We're expanding the schedule from 17 races to 23 this year. Of course, last year was supposed to be expanded as well, had to contract it because of COVID and all the schedule reallocations that they had to do there. Back to 23 races this year, so you're adding 6 to the calendar here. I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton gets 1 over half of the schedule. I'm going to have him listed for 12 wins next year. Gets 12 of the 23. I think Mercedes is still going to be the dominant car, even though there's maybe some questions coming out of preseason testing. I don't think there's anything to read into that. I think Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes are still going to be the team to beat. I've got him penciled for 12 wins this season.
I also have Lewis Hamilton winning the most races in 2021, but I have one less. I'm going with 11 wins for Lewis Hamilton this season. Not far off. I think the the challengers behind them are a bit closer this season. Whether they're not they're going to mid a championship fight, we'll see. But I think Lewis Hamilton, just based off of pure consistency alone and his ability to just qualify the car at its absolute maximum and get the starting position that he so deservingly gets, is going to prevail him into a good spot here. And Mercedes has the luxury of going a bit more aggressive with strategies because they most likely have the fastest car once again. Didn't quite get to see that in preseason testing, but they haven't been the fastest in preseason testing on many occasions, and they still whoop everybody's butts every single year. So, Lewis Hamilton, I think, is the consensus here with most wins. Should be interesting to see who has the second most wins. I'm guessing Max Verstappen, but we'll see what happens with Valtteri Bottas this season if he can finally see if that off-season transformation that he goes off on regularly comes to fruition this time around. But let's go to the underdog winner pick this season. So to characterize this, it's not going to be one of the top two teams, I would say. Like, this is the most definite one that you feel confident about.
We're basically calling it no Hamilton, of course, no Bottas, of course, because Mercedes, but also no Verstappen and no Perez. I think this is the important one for Red Bull. Just taking away the top two teams, looking at the rest of the grid, who's most likely to go out and get that underdog win?
Yeah, exactly. So I can kick this one off here. And this is kind of a little bit of a tease maybe for a little bit later on for my thing, but I'm going with my underdog winner pick to be Lando Norris this season.
That's bold.
I feel really solid about this one. The guy showed me a lot last season. I think he's so consistently good, and I think in 23 races in a calendar year, if that does come to fruition, you're bound to have some chaos a couple of times throughout the year where you have some surprise winners, and I think Lando Norris is a very good candidate for that. Of course, I think Daniel Ricciardo is probably a little bit more likely, but this is like my more of an underdog look than Daniel Ricciardo to win a race this season, and I don't want to predict something like an AlphaTauri win or anything like that this year because that was just totally out of left field. But I think Lando Norris got his first podium last year. I could see that being a first race victory here this season.
That's a bold one because, of course, Norris just has the one career podium. He did so in the first race last year, wasn't able to repeat that podium at all during the season, but also wasn't expected to in a McLaren that was essentially the fourth fastest car, but ended up getting third in the constructors due to some up and down roller coaster of a season that was for Racing Point. I like the swing, though. I'm not going to take the same. I don't know if it's similarly bold based off of what happened last year, but I think he's one of the top drivers in the sport worldwide right now. And I think this team is going to see at least somewhat of a return to form. My underdog winner for 2021 is Charles Leclerc. I think he takes the checkered flag once again. This year gets back in victory lane. Last year was a rough one for Ferrari, but even with how bad that car was, he was still able to consistently find his way into points, still get a couple of podiums early on in the season. I think given the offseason, kind of the change as well with Carlos Sainz coming in there, I think it's going to be a new dynamic. I think they'll fix some of the issues that they had with the engine, which is something that we've also heard a little bit coming from preseason testing. I don't know if they'll be back competing for second in the constructors or anything like that, but I think they'll be much higher in the mid-season battle all year long. And because of that, I think Leclerc is going to go out and snag a win.
I like that pick a lot. I don't know. Do you want to try and take a guess on where you would say Charles Leclerc would win a race this season? I don't know. It's so up in the air, right, with the calendar. But if you had to maybe look at one, I'll do the same for Norris. But do you have?
Let's see. You go ahead first because I guess you've thought about this more because you're the one tossing the question out. But let me take a look here.
Okay, so for me, Lando Norris, I'm gonna go with Austria. I think it's just a track that he's done really, really well in the past, and it always seems to spice things up with the safety car or something happens with that. It's in the summer months as well, so there could be a bit of heat in there and reliability or something like that. I think there's the possibility of the McLaren being exceptionally strong this season with the Mercedes engine in the back of that thing. I think Lando Norris, he did well there in both races last season. I think he could do the same here again. So I go there if I'm going to go anywhere. It's going to be tougher on the Red Bull ring with the Red Bulls looking really strong this season. So I'll say that for now, but Lando Norris at Austria is where I would bet.
Yeah, I like that pick there. Where do I want to go for Mr. Charles Leclerc? See, I don't know how deep into the season I want to wait because if Ferrari is good off the bot, I don't know if Ferrari will be a team that comes out of the gate well or if they'll be like a slow build over the season.
They usually start out stronger.
they usually start out
good.
stronger. Yeah, that's the thing though, when they're good, and maybe it might be something where they start out maybe similarly to last year and then build up as the season goes along. I'm not certain. So I'll go and I'll say Leclerc gets that win. I'm predicting at, let's go with an interesting one. I will go the second half of the year. I'll say he gets the win at Singapore. I'll go a little bit different.
Ooh, interesting. Ferrari does run well around there in the past.
Bit of a different pick there with Marina Bay, but screw it. I'll say something happens to one of the Mercedes and one of those tight, because obviously it's a street circuit, one of those tight areas, something happens there, and the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc is there to pick up the scraps.
Alrighty.
And now he's going to go and qualify 15th and crash out in the first lap there.
You have the next one here with surprise driver of the year.
Yes. So this one, I think there's a few different routes you can go with this one, but I think a lot of people are still kind of sleeping on this guy. And last year, he's also a bit of a candidate for a bounce back driver as well. But when I'm looking at this guy, he was beaten fairly handedly by his teammate last year, but the second half was a lot better than the first half. And I think he could be in line for some impressive results this year. I'm looking at Esteban Ocon as my surprise driver of the year. I think that this guy's still got a lot of talent and a lot of F1 future ahead of him. Let's not forget, like, it was a couple years ago that he was potentially in line to get a Mercedes seat. He was coming off of some very, very special performances with then obviously Racing Point now, but then Force India. Had to take the year off because of some maneuvers that they made at that team. Came back with Renault last year, and first half wasn't as spectacular as people hoped. Second half, he was much, much closer in line with Daniel Ricciardo's performances, often finishing one or two positions either differently or behind him there, had the big podium. Come the end of the season at secure, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are forgetting what he was able to do at Force India and go head-to-head with Sergio Perez and have some really, really great battles with him there. Taking the year off is always going to hurt, and it's interesting to see what happens with Alonso there at that team, taking that break off from F1 and see what that return is like. But for Ocon, he was competing a lot more with Ricciardo at the end of the season, steps into this year, newly branded Alpine. He's the French driver there. You would imagine there's a lot of support for him there, and I think there's a lot of talent, and a lot of people are sleeping on him, so I'm going to have Esteban Ocon as my surprise driver of the year.
Yeah, that's a good one. I really like that pick a lot.
As the police come to arrest me for that hot take.
Yeah. It's not my hot take before the show that we don't have on it, but they're going to need to travel a long way. But for my surprise driver of the year, it is also the same as my underdog winner pick. I'm going to go with Lando Norris. Okay. I think he could really, really shock some people this season. I'm really high on this guy. I think he's a really, really good
to not only
talent.
Go with a win pick, but surprise driver as well. I'm interested to see where you have him in the overall driver standings, because it's got to be a pretty big season for him to be a surprise driver, I think.
Yeah, I want to characterize it as he was very consistent last season. Of course, McLaren was just a little bit off the pace, but he was right there with Carlos Sainz the entire season, only finished about 8 points behind him, I think, overall last season. Like, that is an incredible total for Lando Norris when you look at a guy that's going over to Ferrari this season, that a guy that they rate so highly over there at a manufacturer and constructor as Ferrari do. And then Lando Norris is right there in second. And I think Daniel Ricciardo is going to push him even more so this season and make him a better driver. I think that can carry over to the win prediction that I've got here, because we usually have a surprise driver winner here or there in a season. I'm characterizing that as Lando Norris this season, and I think he could do some pretty great things there with McLaren. I think it's all coming into form. He looked good in preseason testing as well. I think Lando Norris in the 4-car could do some pretty sporty things and be my surprise driver of the year and really solidify his spot as a name in Formula One. So that's Lando Norris heavy on my side of things on the prediction side. But now we have to go to a little bit more of the lesser side of things, the sadder one, and that is biggest disappointment of the season. I'll leave this one off here. I hate to do this, but I'm going with the Canadian Lance Stroll.
Interesting.
I'm going with him this season. I think with Sebastian Vettel over there, they put so much investment into bringing him over to this team. They have to kind of cater to him. I know Lance Stroll's obviously the son of basically the owner of that team that backs the entire team, but it is so crucial for that they really supply Sebastian Vettel with a good race car this season and make sure that he is comfortable over there and not felt like a second driver that he was at Ferrari, even though they didn't want to say it that he was a second driver at Ferrari in the last 2 years, I would say. But I just think Lance Stroll, when I look at what he did with his numbers-wise compared to Sergio Perez in similar car last season, Perez was just off the charts, incredible last season, finishing fourth in the driver's standings. Lance Stroll wasn't really close to that. Of course, he had some bad luck here there. We talked about that the entire way last season around that middle point where you just could not get those finishes in the points consistently, and that was really what held him back from getting ultimately third in the constructors' place for now Aston Martin, then Racing Point last season. But when I look at the midfield battle this season, I think there is a lot of strength that is being added to it in different places, and I think Lance Stroll could be the one that is at the negative side of things when it comes to all of that. So I'm going to say that he's going to be my biggest disappointment this season.
That's a very interesting pick to me because I think a lot of people have Stroll in kind of that 10 to 12-ish range. So expectations are already kind of neutral for him this season. So I find that a very interesting pick. For myself, actually, I'm going with the team as a whole. Aston Martin. Last year, They were coming off of a season where they were essentially the third fastest car. They didn't get third in the constructors due to the points penalty and then some reliability issues come to the end of the season and really throughout the season. But when I'm looking at this team, out of preseason testing, they were one of the teams that struggled the most in terms of staying on the track and logging laps. And I think that's something that is a lot more concerning for a team like Aston Martin, who are going under a lot of changes, versus a team like Mercedes, who are undergoing essentially none. So for starters, that's a concerning sign for me. You're undergoing a big change in terms of driver. Vettel and Perez are two very different drivers in style. So I'm interested to see how that dynamic goes. And most importantly, the midfield just keeps getting tighter and tighter. McLaren is shifting to the Mercedes engine. You would imagine Ferrari bounces back, at least in some way. Alpine is bringing in Fernando freaking Alonso, for crying out loud. And AlphaTauri has looked very strong as well, and lots of people have been talking about their pace. So when I look at all of that, I think things are tightening up again. I don't know how much of that third place speed that they had last year carries over to this year. I still think that there'll be a big player in that mid-pack battle, but I have some concerns going into this year carrying over from last year. So Aston Martin, I think, will be a bit of a disappointment this year.
The green Mercedes now is not going to be quite what they used to be, is what Mr. Cushman is saying. So I do like that pick, though.
Yellow.
Yeah, that's really the biggest issue with that team right now is the pink stripe instead of the neon yellow. But yeah, that's a good one, Kyle. Similar thought process in terms of placement, but you went bigger scheme. I went a bit more specific here with biggest disappointment. But we go back to the positive side of things here. Bounce back driver of the year. Who you got for 2021?
Well, before we started recording, I should say, I mentioned to you that I'm going to kind of contradict myself here with one coming up. And I have Aston Martin as my biggest disappointment, but I also have Sebastian Vettel as my bounce back driver. And that's mainly because I'm looking at Ocon as kind of my surprise driver, whereas people know how good Vettel can be. It's just what can he do this year? And I think he'll be much better than what he was last year. At Ferrari, it was the team, it was the car, everything just kind of crumbled underneath them, and there was just no motivation for Seb Vettel last year. I think going into this year, new team, he'll be revitalized. Even if they aren't necessarily that third place team that they should have been last year, I think they'll drop back a little bit here. I still think he'll be much improved from last year. He'll be much more consistent. He'll have some of those high moments as well. And with that, I think he'll find himself higher in the Drivers' Championship come to the end of the year than he did with Ferrari last year. And for that, I'll have him as my bounce back driver of the year.
Good one. That's a pretty obvious one, but it's a very good one. He's due for a bounce back here after about a year and a half of struggles at Ferrari. This guy was championship eligible, championship contender for many years there, and just couldn't quite seal the deal there later on in the season. Obviously, you think back to the German Grand Prix and how that kind of unraveled as the season went on from there.
Really feels like it was kind of a breaking point for what's transpired the last year and a half.
Yeah. A missed opportunity there for Seb Vettel, but hopefully this is a bounce back year for him because I would love to see him back to his usual form.
With essentially a Canadian team as well. Obviously, it's Aston Martin branded and whatnot, but the owner's Canadian. There's a Canadian teammate there.
This is my two nationalities combining here,
exactly.
So I feel good about this team. If they only put the neon yellow on it, I would have loved it even more. But nonetheless,
sponsorship obligations.
Exactly. Bounce back driver of the year. I'm going with the team for this one, similar to what you did with the biggest disappointment.
A little reversal for us there.
It is. I'm going with Ferrari as my bounce back team of the year. It's just kind of inevitable. I feel like it's Ferrari.
Right?
Like
It has to be.
Like they can't suck that bad 2 years in a row, right? Like they have to have been able to figure it out a little bit at Maranello over the past year and a half or so. They've had plenty of time to do it. So I'm going with Ferrari. I think the driver combo is one of the best on the F1 grid right now. I really rate Carlos Sainz.
Very underrated one.
Yeah, and Charles Leclerc is obviously a world-class talent. We've seen that on multiple occasions. When Ferrari was at its full form, he was exceptionally fast. And I think after the past year, he's just learned to maximize what he can. And I think that skill set that he's learned over the past year with maximizing what the car is able to do, along with bringing him a little bit of a faster car this season, is going to be nowhere near what the 2019 pace was, I would say. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be up there in the topper a part of the grid, I guess. So I say Ferrari. They don't finish sixth in the constructors again this season. I think they make a step up. How far they go, we'll see in our predictions here. But I think just having two drivers here that they feel comfortable with, and obviously that they want now, with Seb Vettel being obviously basically exiled last season. You bring in Carlos Sainz, obviously a huge name here, and then you bring in Charles Leclerc that's been there for a while. Those two are a formidable duo, and I think they could do some real damage this season and get some surprising podiums here and there and just solidify Ferrari's name back near the top of the grid-ish. We'll see what happens for this season. But yeah, that's my bounce-back driver, if you want to call it that, for the season. Now, total podium finishers. This is a tough one. This is a really tough one because we did the numbers a little bit beforehand. 8 was back. There was the total number of drivers that got podiums back in 2019. This past season, 13, which
in
was
less races too.
An unprecedented 17 races.
Huge jump up last year. And more races this year. You would maybe expect the field to be a little bit tighter as well, given some of the cost cap, everything, Ferrari jumping back up. So it's going to be interesting to see just how many we get this year and how many end up getting on that podium.
Yep. So I've got 12. I've got 12 this season. I think you're going to fall one short this season. I think 6 constructors are going to be getting on the podium this season. I feel really confident that it's going to be up there again this season, just based off of how tight that midfield battle is. If Red Bull or Mercedes stumble in a race, you're going to have some surprise guys here that are willing to capitalize, like McLaren, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Alpine, any of these guys, even AlphaTauri, what we've seen with their preseason pace. How much you want to read into that, of course, but I'm going with 12 on the season this year.
I like that number. I'm going to match last year. I'm going to go with 13 again. When I'm looking at this guy, like I said in kind of my preamble there, you've got a tighter midfield or tighter field in general, I think is fair to say. And you've got more races. So I think there's going to be more opportunity for chaos. There's going to be more opportunity for any wet weather shenanigans or anything that happens there. And I look at the teams and I see 6 teams at the top there that I see the driver lineups and could easily see any of the 2 going out and getting at least one podium this year. And AlphaTauri in back-to-back years have gone out and got surprising podiums. Of course, last year, the big one with the win, but the year prior, both Kvyat and Gasly had podiums. So when I'm looking at it, I don't see any reason why it would maybe dip down again unless we get a very kind of stable season this year. But honestly, I would be shocked if we have anything kind of stable given all the circumstances around this season. So I'm going to go bold with it. I'm going to say we match that kind of historic total from last year, maintain that pace. I'll say 13, get on that podium again.
Yeah, I was close to putting it at 13 as well. But with the category that I said earlier with biggest disappointment, I'm just going to say Lance Stroll doesn't get a podium this season. And that's the one person I don't have.
See, I'm banking on at least a couple wet weather races where he has a real opportunity because that's where he really thrives. We saw that at, what was it, Turkey? Turkey, where the wet weather where he came through and he got the pole and was leading until he had a little bit of front wing damage. So we've seen him be very strong at times. It's just kind of the consistency for him. I think he'll still get on at least one podium this year.
I will say it's either Stroll or Ocon now. Like when I look at it, I think either one of those for me that may not get a podium, but nonetheless, that's what I'm looking at for this season. And the Rookie of the Year, it's just a nice, easy one here, Kyle. Who do you have for 2021?
Well, for starters, we've got 3 rookies, correct? Unless you want to count young driver Fernando Alonso.
He was classified that for the tire test, so, you know.
I still can't believe that was a thing, but it's Yuki Sonora for AlphaTauri, and then the 2 rookies at Haas, Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. This is a straightforward one. AlphaTauri is leaps and bounds better than Haas is, and there's nobody else to contend for it. Yuki Sonora is going to be the Rookie of the Year.
Yep, 100%. It's pretty self-explanatory. He's looked really, really good in preseason testing as well, getting acclimated to Formula One cars. I think he's going to be a pretty interesting storyline to watch this season, his development. We're not going to blow him out of the water here and just say that he's going to be, we're expecting a race win like Pierre Gasly had last season. That's just ridiculous to think about. But Yuki Tsunoda is going to be one of the more intriguing storylines that is going to be underlying this season, just to see how well he performs in comparison to Pierre Gasly, who is definitely out of the Red Bull program now. I think he's definitely deserving of more of a top tier ride than a Red Bull junior team, if you want to classify it as that now. I think that there's the opportunities there for Pierre Gasly. This is a huge year for him to prove himself and then try and maybe find a ride elsewhere in a bigger team, a bigger market when 2022 comes around. If you didn't see our 2022 F1 driver lineup predictions, that will definitely tell the story on where we think Pierre Gasly is going to be going next season. But we'll see what happens with that storyline as the year unfolds. So that's the Rookie of the Year. That's all the categories for this season. Let's get into what the Constructors' Championship is going to look like. We'll go from bottom to top.
Yes.
What are you thinking here, Kyle, for your first pick here for the Constructors? Who's finishing dead last? And do they score any points?
No, they do not score any points this year. Dead last in the Constructors, and I feel very confident about this one, is Haas. They have an all-rookie lineup. They're not developing the car at all this season. They've already said that through preseason testing and everything. Everything is lining up for this to be a disastrous season for them. And even when you look at the two drivers that they have as well, it's not like they stepped into F2 and were dominant right away. They both took a year to acclimatize to that championship. In their second seasons, they were much better, and then they got the call up to F1 here with Haas. I think that we're going to see much of the same. I think we're going to see both rookie drivers struggle quite a bit this year, coming to grips with an F1 car, with that Haas car as well. And I think that Haas is going to have a really, really tough season. 0 points on the board, and Haas finishes dead last for me.
Yep, same here. They finished 9th last season. They fall back a spot here this season to 10th. It's all the reasons that Kyle just outlined there. No development for the car this season, a rookie lineup, and a long season ahead of Haas. They're definitely focused on the 2022 new car here, which is probably a good thing for a team of this size and what they're trying to accomplish in this sport. It makes sense that they're looking forward to the future instead of looking at a last year of a generation of a car that you can't really translate any of the developments to for next season. So from the financial point of view, it makes sense. Hopefully the rookies just get a bit more experience under their belt. They feel comfortable with the car, just getting themselves used to Formula One as a sport in general, with the speed and the aerodynamics to an extent. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as next year, but nonetheless, it is experience. And I'm hoping it's not going to be as bad as what they're saying it's going to be, but it seems like it's going to be pretty dismal. So yeah, 0 points for me on the season for Haas. They only scored 3 last year when the car had Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean behind the wheel.
Those came in the first half of the season as well, I'm pretty sure. So
I believe so as well. They struggled as the year went on, less developments, and then this year with basically no developments was what they're saying. Over basically a whole calendar year, that's going to really put them seconds and seconds behind the pack, it seems, by the time the season unwinds down in Abu Dhabi. But yeah, that's Haas. 9th place in the Constructors. I'm going with Williams here. I think they make this just one step up. I think George Russell, after having another year under his belt at Williams, I don't know if necessarily Nicholas Latifi will score points this season, but I think George Russell will score points finally for Williams, that is, this season. He scored a couple for Mercedes. He's never scored any for Williams. I think this season he breaks through with that, and he gets a couple of points to Williams' name here. There's 23 opportunities, hopefully, this season where he can accomplish that feat. I think he was close on a couple of times last season. Do you think back to Mugello, where he was in a points position and fell back late? I think the Williams car is going to be a little bit better this season as well. I think that puts him in a position to get at least a couple of points throughout the season, so I got Williams 9th.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if Latifi scores any, but it would be a disappointing year if Russell doesn't grab at least 1 point throughout the season. Coming out of testing as well, Williams has kind of talked about how their strategy this year is kind of banking on kind of taking out a few select races and really dialing in their car for that. So it's going to be a bit of an up and down season in terms of the pace that Williams has throughout the year, but at those tracks that they've maybe picked out as potential spots to take opportunely, I think George Russell will be there to do so. And we know the chaos that happens throughout races throughout the year. There's always a handful where things go crazy, and there's only 11, possibly 12 finishers. If something like that happens, I would be very surprised if George Russell isn't there at some point throughout the year to capitalize. So I as well have Williams ninth.
All righty. You have the next one here, P8.
Yes, and P8, again, fairly straightforward, at least to this point. Alfa Romeo. I think they're that team that's much more consistently going to be in conversations for maybe a ninth or 10th place than a Williams or a Haas is, but they're also going to be a decent ways off from that true mid-pack. I think Antonio Giovinazzi is an underrated driver in the F1 grid. He's got some real skill, especially when you look at the starts this past year. He was excellent on. Further progression from him, Kimi Räikkönen, who was just a legend of the sport, very consistent. I think that they'll get a couple of points finishes throughout this year and finish eighth.
Alrighty, I have them in eighth as well, staying put with where they were last season.
Yeah.
I think they'll be closer to that midfield battle. They're not going to be in that midfield battle, but they'll be somewhat closer, I would say. And that just comes down to a bit of an improved Ferrari power unit in the back of that thing. When all the Ferrari cars struggled last season at a significant rate, and I think that this is just an opportunity for Räikkönen, if this is his final year in Formula One, if he doesn't want to go over to this next generation of car, I think he can probably just end it on a somewhat of a high note, get a couple of points finishes throughout the year. And like you said with Giovinazzi, I'm expecting good things from him this season. He's had a couple of seasons now in Formula One. He really needs to show his stuff here if he wants to stay in the sport here next season. It's a proving year for him, and just maximizing what that car can get. If he can get a couple of points finishes here or there back in the 7th to 10th range, if opportunities fall his way here or there, I think that would be a really successful season for Giovinazzi. So, yeah, I don't think that they can really challenge the top 7 teams, but they'll be comfortably in 8th, I would say. So that is Alfa Romeo. Now you get into kind of the swing stuff a little bit to an extent. The 3rd to 7th, you can characterize it however you want, really, this season. It's all up in the air, really, really tight from what we've seen in preseason testing. But for 7th place, I'm going to go with AlphaTauri here once again this season. I don't quite believe in the hype just quite yet that they're going to be there on a consistent enough basis to challenge these works teams that have so much development, so much money, and so much development behind each of these cars. Not to say that AlphaTauri doesn't. I just think their driver lineups are a little bit more solid all around as well. Pierre Gasly can only do so much. I think Yuki Sonora will have a good season. I just don't know if he'll be quite there at the level of some of these other guys that are more acclimatized to the sport itself. And I'm going to just say AlphaTauri stays put in 7th, but they will definitely put on a major fight throughout the season.
Yeah, I think it would still be very hard-pressed for AlphaTauri to get past 7th here. I've got them there as well, and I think it'll be closer for them. I think they'll be consistently in that conversation, whether that's with Gasly or a surprise rookie season from Tsunoda. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, those are just some big, big teams to go and try and compete with in the constructor standings. Last year, they were in the conversation a little bit, mainly behind a win. I would be very surprised, of course, if they go out and get another win that helps propel them into the conversation. Again, I think it'll be much closer for them on a consistent basis, up with some of those mid-pack teams, but 7th place still for me here.
Absolutely. All righty. Now we get into the meat and potatoes.
Yes.
6.
And
what do you got?
This is where Ferrari was last year. I do not have Ferrari in 6th once again. I've got Alpine down here in 6th. I think they've got a solid driver lineup there with Alonso and Ocon. I do have some concerns when I look at how much Ferrari improves, how much Aston Martin is able to hang on to what they had from last year, and McLaren as well, adding that Mercedes power unit. I just think that things are maybe trending in a direction for those other teams that it maybe isn't for Alpine. They're also losing Daniel Ricciardo, who is one of the top drivers in the sport. I like Ocon this season. I think Alonso will be solid, but at the end of the day, I think they're going to lose that consistent high end from Ricciardo and end up dropping down into 6th.
I have Alpine in 6th as well, falling back one spot. All the reasons you just mentioned there, it's going to be very interesting to see how the impact of the loss of Cyril Abiteboul will be this season with him not being the team principal. How much will that impact the team? I think Alpine is going to have a really, really good season. I think they're on line for a podium or two from each guy if they fall their way in circumstances. I would love to see Fernando Alonso on a podium once again in Formula One. I think he's got the car capable of it if the circumstances fall his way here or there. But yeah, I just don't know if they quite are there yet. Renault, Alpine, whatever you want to classify it as, has been kind of like this. They've kind of plateaued here a little bit over the past couple of seasons. They just kind of stay stagnated, and they haven't made that next level push that I think they're looking at for this next generation of car that they can really challenge and become that old Renault of old where they were championship contenders and everything like that. So I can't put them any higher than probably that. I was really close between this 5th and 6th place team that I have.
Yeah, I think you can make an argument for 5th here, but I think that's a little bit too much for me.
Yeah, I think Ferrari's hopefully development in the car can propel them up a little bit further in the constructors. And when you look at what Sebastian Vettel's results were last season in comparison to Charles Leclerc, if you get just about 50 more points from Sebastian Vettel or that second driver, you're looking at a different situation in that midfield battle. And I could see that with Carlos Sainz being added to the fold here. But that's Alpine in 6th. They fall back a spot this season. And I have Aston Martin in 5th place here for the constructors. I think they fall back a spot here. They were so close to finishing 3rd last season. They probably should have finished 3rd.
Yeah, without the points penalty, they would have. But
if they had the 3rd fastest car last season. But I think they take that step back this season. I don't know. I just can't quite put Aston Martin ahead of Ferrari this season, and I think McLaren's going to be really, really strong as well. Aston Martin has got this whole rebranding going on. I like what they're doing with the team. It makes a whole lot of sense financially wise. I like Sebastian Vettel. I think Lance Stroll underperformed a little bit this season. That's why I have them falling back. I think the car will be there. I just don't know against some of these topper echelon drivers that I consider maybe Lance Stroll to be. I like the guy a lot. I just don't know if he's quite there with these Fernando Alonso's, Esteban Ocons, Sebastian Vettels, and Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc here in this midfield battle to quite push Aston Martin back to 4th place once again this season. So I got them 5th.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what kind of Stroll we get this year because the big criticism of him has been the consistency. It just hasn't been there so far in his career. We started to see some of the high points last year. I still think he's a solid F1 driver and deserves to be on the grid. He just needs to find that consistency here. I also have Aston Martin in 5th here. I think they dropped down a little bit. I think they'll be in line with kind of Ferrari performance this year. Not saying like the Ferrari from last year. I think Aston Martin and Ferrari will be very, very comparable in terms of pace this year. And I just favor the Ferrari driver lineup. When I look at the two lineups there, you've got Seb Vettel, who we really don't know what kind of level we're going to get from him, and Lance Stroll, who's been very inconsistent, versus Carlos Sainz, who's been super consistent with McLaren and has had those high moments as well, and Charles Leclerc, who might just be one of the top 3 drivers in the entire world right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out and proves that this year. So when I look at the lineups between those two teams that I think will be very, very similar, the edge goes to Ferrari for me, so Aston Martin I've got 5th.
All righty. Top 4. I can imagine where you've got this next one, but we'll see. What do you got for P4?
Yeah, I don't think Ferrari's going to make it all the way up back into that 3rd or 2nd conversation, but I think they'll be right there in that 4th, 5th conversation in the entire year. And as I mentioned with talking about Aston Martin and having them in 5th because of the driver lineup compared to Ferrari, well, I've got Ferrari in 4th because I think they've got a fantastic driver lineup there that's going to get the most out of that car week in, week out. When they're on, they're going to be on. And even when they're off, I think they'll be contending for points as well. And that's going to be huge for that team. I'm excited to see Carlos Sainz over there. That's going to be a fascinating dynamic between himself and Charles Leclerc after what has been a very fun, jovial relationship with Lando Norris. Things could go either way with Charles Leclerc. It remains to be seen how things will go depending on how things go on track, essentially. But Ferrari, I would be shocked if they haven't made at least some improvements from last year and find themselves more consistently in that mid-pack battle. So for Ferrari, we've already seen some of the engine improvements versus last year from all 3 teams that are using the Ferrari engines. I've got them making a bit of a return to the scene, I guess you could say, getting up in 4th.
Yep, I have them in fourth as well. All the reasons you stated there, it just makes too much sense for me to not put them there. It just makes Ferrari look a lot better this season with the hopeful advancements that they've made underneath the engine cover for that thing this season. If they can just get some reliability with it, and you have a formidable duo like we've talked about throughout the episode so far, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. I mean, it's a really, really solid lineup. And when you look at what Carlos Sainz did at McLaren, you expect similar, if not better, results here in a Ferrari. And I expect both of them to push each other throughout the season. That's just going to maximize what that car can bring. And Charles Leclerc is a world-class driver. He's an exceptional talent. Excuse me, easy for me to say. But I think Ferrari is just in line. They were somewhat in that mix there in the later stages of the season in that midfield battle. But I expect with that second driver being so good in Carlos Sainz that they can make up the gap that they had along with advancements. Ferrari finishes fourth for me this season. And then in third, it's pretty predictable. I've got McLaren here. I don't think they can challenge the top two quite yet, but I really like what they've done over the offseason. Daniel Ricciardo being a very, very good addition to that team, along with my guy, Lando Norris. I think he's going to have a great season, and that Mercedes engine underneath it does really help that team as well. I think that all of the recipe is there for success. I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do in this next generation of car, if they can really challenge the top two teams here in Mercedes and Red Bull. I think they'll come close. I think they'll get multiple podiums this season for both drivers, because they're going to be that third best team. I think there's definitely room there for that possibility. I think they'll be at definitely the forefront of the midfield battle. I think that's probably the most confident one I'm in right now is McLaren in P3, just because of the driver lineup and what we saw last season. They finished third, they stay there, and I think they could even extend that gap a little bit to the midfield this season, having a very good driver lineup, a very good car. Everything is there for McLaren to have a good season this season, and I'm just happy that they're back to what their usual form was that we so famously remember back when Lewis Hamilton was a part of the team, and obviously way before that in their history. I'm happy that McLaren is near the front of the grid here, so I've got them in P3.
Yeah, I've got them there as well. They're not quite at that Lewis Hamilton stage yet. I'm going to ask you to hold your horses on that one. But
I didn't say that. I said hopefully they're getting there.
I know, but they're still a ways away, to be fair.
I know, but
it's great to see the McLaren-Mercedes relationship back again. Interested to see what that results in on track and maybe where their strengths lie this season. But when they lost Carlos Sainz to Ferrari for the 2 hours that it was between that announcement and Ricciardo joining McLaren, it was kind of like, okay, where are things going to go here? Because you've got a very consistent driver in Carlos Sainz. Could we maybe see a bit of a downgrade here? And they went out and get Daniel Ricciardo, who in my opinion is an upgrade over Carlos Sainz and is arguably the third or fourth best driver in the entire sport when you look at his career. I really like that combination there. Ricciardo fits in super well at McLaren. I think it's going to be some great on-track battles between himself and Norris. But at the end of the day, I think Daniel Ricciardo is going to get the most out of that McLaren. I think he's going to get a couple of podiums at least this season, and really solidify McLaren as that third best team, because last year they were essentially the fourth team that capitalized on Racing Point mistakes to capture that third in the constructors, which was, I won't say undeserved, but was not necessarily something that reflected the true pace throughout the entire season. I think this year they'll be much more clearly up in that top three, up there in third in the constructors. And I think the battle throughout the season will be much more for fourth through sixth in constructors rather than third.
Absolutely. Alrighty, the top two. What do you got for, I guess you can just say P1 because we know what P2 would be.
Get them out of the way together. Mercedes 1, Red Bull 2. It's pretty straightforward. Red Bull just have too many question marks with how their car essentially handles and whether Sergio Perez will be up there and competing with the likes of Valtteri Bottas, or if he'll be more that kind of fourth, fifth range and be better than what they've had in the past, but maybe not that same high level that Max Verstappen is. And it's a question that we've all been asking for multiple years now. What really is the quality of that second seat at Red Bull and with Sergio Perez? And we're going to find out this season. They could very easily have a great season where Perez goes up there and the two Red Bull drivers split their Mercedes in the championship order. We'll see if either of us predict that. But I have my reservations about that second car still. I think Perez will be better than what they've had in the last couple of years, but I still think they'll be very, very hard hard-pressed to challenge Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes for either title. I think this is pretty straightforward. Mercedes as the Constructors winners yet again.
I don't have it this way.
You are insane.
I'm going with Red Bull to win the Constructors Championship this season. I want to be different, and I think this is definitely the way to go. I'm going to buy into the
different with wrong if you like, but
that's okay. I'm okay to be wrong on this one.
That's a swing.
I'm going to go with Red Bull because I think that second seat has got a lot to offer, and I think Perez brings a lot to fill that gap that we've seen in the past. Consistency is key this season. Sergio Perez is one of the most consistent drivers on the F1 grid. We saw that last season in a Racing Point, for crying out loud, finishing 4th in the standings. I mean, this guy is legit, and he's going to push Max Verstappen. I think they're both going to push Mercedes to the extreme this season. Wow. And I think, the win total may not be there, but I think the consistency will be there. Reliability will be there. And Red Bull, they were very strong at the end of last season. Verstappen challenging on a very consistent base. If they can have a guy that has the capability of splitting the Mercedes on pit stop strategy where they cannot just block off Verstappen and not have to worry about a second driver, adding that second driver here is an extremely crucial element to Red Bull's challenging for the title bid, because I think that messes with Mercedes' easy strategies that they've had in the past with just blocking off one guy. You have to block two here this season, and that's an extremely difficult task when you have both drivers as capable as Verstappen and Perez, when you have Bottas and Hamilton right ahead of them. I think it's going to be very, very entertaining this season. It's going to go right down to the wire, in my opinion, and I'm going to give Red Bull the edge because I think they are the team that builds as the season goes on. They build, they get stronger as the season goes on, as we've seen in many, many seasons. And I think that consistency and development will pay off for Red Bull this season. I think we see a change this season. I think it's they've had their time in the turbo hybrid era has Mercedes. This is the closest I think anybody's ever been to challenging this season. And I think Red Bull's the team to do it. So they have the honor of winning the Constructors Championship this season. I've got Mercedes P2.
You're nuts. You're absolutely insane. And fair play to you if you pull this one off, but I just can't see Bottas being that poor to finish that low versus the two Red Bulls and drop back anything that Hamilton does. You can kind of criticize Bottas for what he is, and that's fine, but I would be stunned if Red Bull is able to pull that one off. I like Sergio Perez quite a bit, but I still have some concerns about that car and how it handles, specifically for that second seat. I think Verstappen will make things very close for the overall Drivers' Championship this season. But to go out and say that they'll go out and win the Constructors over Mercedes, that one's bold. I got to give it to you.
Yeah, I just when I looked at the numbers,
I think you're extremely low on Valtteri Bottas, though.
Yeah, I am. I just can't get over that. Like I just feel that way, and I have for a couple of years now. I just don't think that he's quite what they need over there at Mercedes. I think Sergio Perez will prove that this season that he's capable of beating Valtteri Bottas. So that's a bit of a hint to the driver's standings. But yeah, that's the shakeup. We were very similar the entire way until the top, Kyle. We'll see. I'm excited. I don't care if I'm wrong on this one. Might as well go different and just not go the status quo way. So I'll go Red Bull and Mercedes, switching it up at the top for Constructors. But let's get into the Drivers' Championship here. We'll go through the bottom ones relatively quickly because we don't expect them to score some points. But that midfield battle, and especially at the top end, is where it's going to get very interesting. So you can lead us off here with the bottom four. We can just kind of get that over into – yeah.
20th Mazepin, 19th Schumacher, 18th Latifi, and 17th Kimi Räikkönen.
I have the same. I have George Russell finishing right ahead of him there in 16th. So yeah, Mazepin, Schumacher, Latifi, and Räikkönen. And then you've got George Russell there in 16th for myself. And then after that, I mean, how do you want to go about this? Because we can go back
Just
and
go
forth.
3 by 3 from here. Like, there's not much to really say about the bottom 4. I think for Raikkonen, I think it's time. I think the Alfa Romeo is going to be closer to the Williams than it is even remotely to the AlphaTauris personally. I think the Haas is by far the worst. I think Latifi, I'd be surprised if he scores a point, but I think he'll have overall a higher finish than either Schumacher or Mazepin. For Raikkonen, though, I just think that Russell has the ability to go out there and maybe grab an extra point or two than him throughout the season. So that's why I've got Russell ahead of him there. If we want to go 3 above that as well and just kind of group these all together above Russell, I've got Giovinazzi and then Tsunoda there in 14th.
Yeah, same. Russell, Giovinazzi, and Tsunoda there for 16th, 15th, and 14th. I think those are all self-explanatory. It just depends on how many points they score. I think Giovinazzi will score more points than Russell is what it comes down to, and Russell will score more points than Raikkonen, obviously. I think they could probably switch Raikkonen and Russell if it comes down to it. If Raikkonen is more consistent, and we saw it last season. He was very, very good at getting the most out of the car, finishing ahead of the Ferraris on some occasions in qualifying. They just didn't quite have the race pace to back it up. So if they can get a little bit more race pace and he can capitalize on a good qualifying effort, Raikkonen could definitely finish ahead of Russell. But I'll go with the young British guy a little bit more over the elderman in the Finnish guy. So yeah, that's the bottom 6-ish there. Now it gets into a little bit more of a difficult one because now you're into the top tier teams. Yuki Sonora, you can obviously group him in there with AlphaTauri. I think it's going to be hard pressed for him to try and make that step into this next chunk of drivers because I think AlphaTauri, as we talked about with the constructors,
he's a rookie.
7th. And the rookies, right? So
I think things get interesting from 13 onwards. For myself at 13th, I've still got Pierre Gasly. I just think the AlphaTauri is still the 7th fastest car probably this season. At least that's what I've got going into the season. I think Gasly's going to be hard pressed to break into that top 12 in the Drivers' Championship, just given how tight it'll probably be with Alpine, Aston Martin, Ferrari, and McLaren. If you want to group them all together as that kind of true mid-pack. AlphaTauri's that bridge in between. I think they'll be close to 6th come the end of the season, but I just find it too difficult to find anywhere where Gasly is going to be able to outpoint anybody from Alpine or Aston Martin.
I have Lance Stroll finishing here in 13th.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Just to back up my biggest disappointment kind of claim.
That would be a disappointment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have my reservations on him this season. I think, like I said, Sebastian Vettel, I think, should get the bit more of a priority this season, more so than Lance Stroll. I hope that's the case, to be honest, just because it is Sebastian Vettel, a 4-time world champion. And I think his consistency will be there more so than Lance Stroll. And I like some of these guys ahead of him a little bit more. I think Pierre Gasly could get into this next mix, which is why I have him a little bit higher. But I've got Lance Stroll there in 13th spot. Ahead of him, I've got his it's not the fellow Frenchman. It's Esteban Ocon for me here in 12th.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I've got him in 12th here. I think he'll just be a little bit off the pace from Alpine. I have them 6th in the constructors, so I think that makes sense in where I see them fitting in. And I think Pierre Gasly could have a little bit of a stronger season than what people are predicting. Of course, the win total from last season is going to bring that level up from what 2020 numbers were. That's an extra 25 points, obviously. But he was ahead of Lance Stroll, or tied on points with Lance Stroll last season, and he was ahead of Esteban Ocon as well last season. I think we could see a similar thing here this year, and I think Pierre Gasly's have to prove something once again that win was no fluke. And I like AlphaTauri speed a little bit this season from what we've seen in preseason testing. I think he can break into this next echelon of drivers. So I have Esteban Ocon in 12th, and then I guess Pierre Gasly in 11th. That's where I have him.
Wow. Okay, then I would be stunned if Pierre Gasly is able to break into that top group without some kind of like win or anything like that to kind of load up on some points. Because even last season with Stroll missing a race there and having some multiple issues in the middle of the season, they still finished on the same points with Gasly, of course, getting that win and the huge points haul with that. In 12th, I've got Lance Stroll. I think he's going to be the least of the top 6 teams there. I still think that there's some potential there, but with Aston Martin taking a step back, I think so will his performance. For Stroll, I'm less looking for kind of the high-end performance and more the consistency, because if he finds that consistency, then as the team kind of builds up in that Aston Martin branding, so will he up the constructors, or sorry, up the drivers' championship standing. So I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that he's kind of the bottom of that top 6 teams group. You have him down in 13th. It's a bit rich for me. And in 11th, actually, I've got Fernando Alonso here. I think that he's going to struggle a little bit out of the gate finding his rhythm, because he hasn't been in a regular racing series in quite a while. He's done some WEC stuff. He's done obviously Indy 500 stuff. He's done Dakar. But those are all kind of one-off things. It's not anything where it's kind of week in, week out in the rigors of a really challenging season with 23 races here. I think Alpine will be the 5th place team in the constructors, and with that, I've got Fernando Alonso finishing 11th here. Maybe a little bit disappointing versus what some people are expecting from him, but I think that there'll be some struggles there, maybe some high points, maybe at some tracks that really lend to his driving style, but overall, I've got him 11th.
Alrighty. I've got Fernando Alonso in 10th, just
Okay.
one spot higher there. This falls in line with what I have with Alpine, just finishing that 6th place spot. I think Vettel will be a little bit higher than that, so I have Fernando Alonso behind him. But yeah, Fernando Alonso, I think he's going to be actually a little bit better than what you're thinking to start the season. It's a little bit more of an even playing field to start the season, a little bit rusty
you
for
got him
everybody.
one spot higher. It's nothing crazy.
No, I know, but I think he's going to be a decent driver this season. I think he'll be consistent. I see top 5 or top 8 finishes on a decently consistent basis for Fernando Alonso. And I think he's out to prove something this season as well, that he's not just coming back, just for the fame or the glory. He's coming back here to try and, prove something, get a podium here or there. And I think that'll vault him up to P10 in the standings.
The only thing for me there is when I look at Alpine last year, it was essentially with Daniel Ricciardo there, their top end performances were 5th, 6th, and then they had a couple podium finishes there when some other people had issues. And I just don't see Ocon or Alonso really being that same tier. And so I think they're going to be hard pressed to consistently find their way up in that 5th or 4th conversation, unless other people have some significant issues. And because of that, I've got Esteban Ocon in 10th. And I think the big thing for me having him as my surprise driver is him beating Alonso at the end of the season on points in the driver's standing. But at the end of the day, I do think that this is overall a step down for them in terms of their driver lineup. Losing Daniel Ricciardo was really big for me. I don't know what to expect from Alonso this year. I think he'll be fine, but I think overall it'll be much more in line with what we saw from Esteban Ocon last year, and then Ocon takes a bit of a step this year. So I think overall, Alpine, even if they do make some improvements with the car, they overall take a bit of a step back because of the downgrade in driver lineup. So I've got the 2 Alpine drivers 10th and 11th here.
Alrighty. P9, Sebastian Vettel for me.
Me as well.
I think that's where he fits in for me. That's why I have Aston Martin in 5th. I think he's going to have the edge over both Alpine
Big gap
guys.
there between Stroll and Vettel for yourself.
Yeah, I think Vettel will have a really good season. I just think he'll carry the points load for them, and I think he'll get a podium here or there, maybe 1, 2 this season if things fall his way. But it's the consistency for Sebastian Vettel for me. If he can build off of obviously a poor last season, if he can just kind of start fresh this year and just go in there with a clean slate and a good mindset, he can just come away with some solid points. And I think he can edge out both Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso this season in a probably better car overall. So I'm going to put him in P9.
I will say that I'm a little surprised that you have Vettel in 9th with Stroll in 13th and still have Aston Martin in 5th in the constructors. I thought that maybe with Stroll being that low, I thought you might have Vettel a spot or 2 higher. But for myself, I think that he'll find his way again this season for Vettel, find that consistency. I don't think he'll break into that group with the Ferraris, the McLarens, or anything like that. But I think we'll see some of that Seb Vettel of old maybe start to creep back in every now and again this season. Revitalize Vettel at a team where he's locked in for at least a couple of seasons here. He knows there's a future there. They're trying to build something big there. And I think this year he'll take lead of that team. Maybe not the heights that they saw last year with Perez being essentially the number 4 driver all season long, championship wide. They'll take a step back, but I think that there will be some building blocks into the future here for Aston Martin and both Sebastian Vettel. Beginning with 8th, though, is when we get into the top 4. So we've got kind of like a 9th through 14th group, a 15th through 20 group, and then we've got here to the top 8. And I'm interested to see how things break down here for yourself. But in 8th, and rounding up the rear of those top 4 teams, I've got Carlos Sainz. I think Ferrari will take that step up, but at the end of the day, is still a downgrade from the McLaren from last year. I don't think Ferrari's going to make that jump all the way up to be a top 3 team. And with that, I think Sainz will have consistency. I think he'll have his moments. I think he'll grab a podium this year. But going through and really breaking into that top 7 or top 6 is going to be very hard pressed to do. So I've got Sainz in 8th.
Yeah, me too. I have Sainz, and I think he'll just be a little bit off of what Charles Leclerc is able to do this season. And I think it'll take a little bit of time for him to adjust at Ferrari, a new car, totally different driving style as well from the McLaren. I think that it'll take a little bit of time to adjust with, and especially with Charles Leclerc kind of being the 1A to 1B kind of situation there. I think Sainz will just be a little bit behind the 8 ball. But it won't be too long before he gets going. And it's so hard with this top 8 because you can put any guy kind of in this 5th to 8th range on how you want to predict it with Ferrari, because they can have some exceptionally good results and they can also have some stinkers as well. It's all up in the air. But I've got Carlos Sainz kind of bringing up the rear end of that top 8, like you mentioned there. And then ahead of him, I've got Charles Leclerc in 7th place. I think Ferrari's just going to be a bit too hard pressed to challenge McLaren this season on a consistent enough basis. I think Charles Leclerc definitely has the potential to get a potential top 5 in the points. I think it's going to be really, really close with him. But I don't know if I could put him ahead of the McLaren, which I rate pretty highly this season. And I'll stick him in there in 7th. It's definitely off of where he finished last season in terms of how I want to view it with what we expect from the Ferrari and the points total that he gathered from a poor Ferrari last season. Finishing 8th last season, I think he gets a jump up a number here and finishing P7 in the driver's standings.
In 7th here, I've got Lando Norris. I think Leclerc is going to be a little bit better than that, and I think that there's going to be a slight gap between 7th and then the top 6 there. I think the McLaren will be good, but not so good that it's going to be leaps and bounds better than the rest of the mid-pack. And with that, I think Leclerc is going to have a really, really strong season this year and jump back into that top 6 conversation. And so with that, Lando Norris is kind of the next guy up in that group for myself. I think he's exactly like you've said, he's super, super consistent. He's shown that last year. He had the one highlight there with the 3rd place finish, getting on the podium for the first time in the season opener. Wasn't able to repeat that, unfortunately, last year. I think he'll find his way onto the podium a couple times this year, but I'm not quite as certain as you are about him going up and taking that next kind of leap into that next group for F1 this season. So I've still got Lando Norris 7th.
Yeah, I have him 6. I think this is why I have him as my surprise driver of the year. If he can beat Charles Leclerc, that quantifies as a surprise for me this season. That'd be huge, I think, for a guy like this who's relatively young. I mean, he's only 21 years of age now. Like, this is a young guy in Formula One, the future of it. And if he can beat a guy that is as high profile as Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari this season, that's massive for Lando Norris and for McLaren as a constructor. So I have him finishing P6 ahead of Leclerc. It's going to be, I think, separated by a couple points by the end of it all when it comes down to it. I think it's going to be extremely, extremely close. But the consistency and the reliability, I think, out of that McLaren will outdo what the Ferrari is able to do this season. And I'm not 100% sold on their reliability yet. We saw some issues in preseason testing. I'm sure they'll figure that out as the entire 23 race calendar goes along. But I have Lando Norris, surprise driver of the year, a win this season. I think he gets P6.
Interesting. I think that just given maybe the difference between the McLaren and Ferrari is going to be the decider there as to whether 6 should be the expectation or whether that is a bit of a surprise for Lando Norris this year, just because given last year, of course, the Ferrari was so far off versus the rest of the top 4 or top 5 teams even at times. It was just very difficult for Leclerc to go up there and get those points. If Ferrari is more in line with the McLaren this year, then yeah, going out and beating Leclerc will be a surprise. But for myself, I think 6th is probably the goal at this point, not the expectation, but depending on what we see from the Ferrari this year, that might differ for myself and just in general. But in sixth there, Charles Leclerc for myself. I really thought about putting him up in fifth, but I think that's just a little too much to gamble on Ferrari really making some noise again this year. I think he's the third best driver on the grid behind Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen there in the top three. I think this is a talented, special generational talent here with Charles Leclerc. And I think with Ferrari returning somewhat back to form, I think we'll see Leclerc continue to get the most out of that car, go up there, challenge for fifth in the Drivers' Championship. I don't think he'll get there at the end of the day, but he'll make things close and really pull Ferrari up closer to that McLaren in the constructors. But for myself, Charles Leclerc in sixth, and with that, Daniel Ricciardo in fifth. I think that there may be a conversation to be had about Ricciardo or Perez in fifth, depending on how things go this year, given what we've seen from that second Red Bull seat this year, in the past. But I think that they'll be slightly better than in years past, more consistency with Perez. And so with that, Ricciardo, I think, will be in fifth. I don't know if they'll go out and get that famed McLaren win that they've been long awaiting for, but I think he'll be consistently in conversation for that fourth, fifth place position, just as he was last year. But I think he'll have more opportunity to go out and grab some podiums this year with the McLaren, with the Mercedes engine as well this year. Tantalizing combination there between Ricciardo and that team into the future. But beginning this year, I think he grabs fifth.
Yeah, I have him in fifth as well. Not going to quite break the top two. I think he's going to be pushing the guy I have in fourth a little bit, but not quite enough for me to put him up there there yet. It's still quite a sizable gap from what the end of last season was to this season between the top two and McLaren. But Daniel Ricciardo is going to bring that car quite this is going to be his best shot to get a top five in the points for obviously a couple of years here now. Renault, he didn't quite have that capability as much. He finished fifth last year, of course, but this is where a year where he can take that next step to really challenging these guys on a consistent basis. And I think he'll just be that kind of that stop, that's the separation, I guess, between the 6th to 8th range. He's kind of by himself, I think, maybe on an island in 5th, and then the top 4. I think that's what I'm looking at with the driver standings here. So I have Daniel Ricciardo in P5, and then to kind of go off my constructors, I've got Valtteri Bottas here in P4.
Wow.
He was, let's not forget here, people, he finished behind Max Verstappen, Kimi Räikkönen, and Sebastian Vettel way back when the Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes were all up at the front with the top 3. This is a guy that has not been a top 2 driver in Mercedes equipment when they are still the most dominant car. I predict Red Bull to be closer this season. I think they're going to push him. They're going to make the split strategies. And Valtteri Bottas, when he gets back in traffic, if there is a split strategy, is not capable of what Lewis Hamilton is capable of in these traffic moments. He usually struggles in these situations coming back through the field if he has a problem, unlike Lewis Hamilton. And I think Bottas will have more of those this season, and Red Bull will split them right down the middle. So I have Valtteri Bottas taking a huge step back this season and proving why that there should be a replacement there in that second Mercedes seat come 2022. And I have him in P4 behind the top 3 guys.
I think that's harsh. I think Bottas is still at least a decent number 2 for Mercedes in terms of doing what they need him to do. And that's basically let Lewis Hamilton through and get the wins. I think the Mercedes is still going to be a dominant enough car that 4th isn't really going to be a conversation point. Like, let's not forget last year with all the struggles that Valtteri Bottas still grabbed second in the constructors over Max Verstappen. Like, let's not forget that was a thing. So I think you're going to need to see a big push from Red Bull this year for them to have any chance at beating them in the constructors and also beating Bottas for that 3rd place as well. I think that's asking a lot of Sergio Perez in a new car, which is a car as well that has shown over the last 2 years to be extremely difficult for that second driver. I expect more consistency. I expect more high points for Sergio Perez this year than in the past 2 years for that second Red Bull seat, but I've still got him 4th. I think that asking him to go out and split the Mercedes as well as Max Verstappen, I think he will this year, is going to be a lot to ask for him. So I've got Perez fourth. I think you're being a bit harsh on Bottas and maybe projecting a much tighter battle than I am between the Mercedes and Red Bull as well, potentially this year. But I think that's just asking too much, because looking back to 2018, which is the year you mentioned when Bottas finished fifth, Max Verstappen is a generational talent. We expect him to get the most and exceed whatever car he's in. And last year, he wasn't even able to beat Bottas. And then that year as well, the Ferrari was a legitimate title challenger with Sebastian Vettel, and Lewis Hamilton was just on another planet that year, being able to maximize your race in, race out. I don't think that's that same point for Red Bull this year. I think Verstappen will make things interesting at times this year. But I'd be hard pressed to see Red Bull making that much of an advancement on Mercedes to completely split the duo.
I think they built it on last season, so that Red Bull is actually really close to Mercedes this season. It's going to be nip and tuck throughout the season, and I think Perez is a better driver than Bottas. So that's my take on it.
I don't disagree on that. I just think that the Mercedes is that much better than the Red Bull, plus the uncertainty with that second seat at Red Bull.
I don't see it as that way as much this season. Okay. I think it's going to be pretty close.
So just to make sure on things, you believe that second seat at Red Bull isn't the car and that it was the drivers the last 2 years?
Yes. I will put it down to that more so. I think they've made a car more stable this season for the second driver to cater to as well. So that's going to increase that benefit, and the regulation changes with the rear end of the car and the tokens and how you want to adjust that this season is going to really benefit Red Bull, because they had that problem last season. I think Perez is a really solid guy that's going to get you consistent results. And if the Red Bull hadn't struggled as much in qualifying and Perez is really good at qualifying, then I think that team is just going to be – the sky's the limit really for Red Bull for me this season. Obviously, I have them as constructor champion. So, yeah, I think it's going to be I'm really excited for this season, because I think we're going to get a really good battle in both the drivers and the constructors championships. But in P3, I've got Sergio Perez here.
Let's just do the top three from here, because we know who third is going to be for each of us, because we've already mentioned it. It's either going to be Bottas or Perez. Obviously, Bottas for myself, Perez for you. I think let's just do the top three all at once here.
Alrighty, so my top three, I've got Sergio Perez obviously in third, Max Verstappen in second, and I have Lewis Hamilton winning the Drivers' Championship once again, breaking the all-time record to go to 8 and solely in sole possession of that, passing Michael Schumacher's record, which he tied last season. I'm not going to go that bold where I think Lewis Hamilton's going to lose the Drivers' Championship this season. I think the points accumulated from Verstappen and Perez will be right there with Hamilton, that they will surmount the gap that Hamilton may have to Verstappen. So I have Red Bull splitting the Mercedes, and I think Lewis Hamilton gets it done once again this season. I can't bet against the guy. He is one of the best, if not the best drivers in the world right now. And I think he may take a little bit of time to get into the season, as he usually does. He's typically a slower starter, but then in the summer months, this guy is just on a rail. When you get to Europe and all the European tracks, it's just another level for Lewis Hamilton. And I think we'll see that once again this season. He may stumble a little bit as Red Bull builds on late in the season, which I'm betting again that's going to happen. I think Red Bull will come a little bit stronger out of the gates as well, which is why I think it's going to be closer. That's the problem in the past. They start off a bit too slow, and then it's just too big of a gap to build over the season. That's why I've got Red Bull finishing right there ahead of Mercedes in the constructors. I think it's going to go down to the last 3 races for the season for the drivers. I think Hamilton will clinch it in the last 2 or 3 races, maybe. It could go down to the wire, but I think Hamilton's consistency, the Mercedes reliability, and just Mercedes as a whole will be able to prevail. And Lewis Hamilton gets it done and gets the 8th championship for Mercedes. And Verstappen falls short of his first F1 title in second.
We agree here. Obviously not for third, because I've got Bottas still grabbing that one, but Verstappen second, Hamilton first. I think it'll be closer this year, but at the end of the day, I think Hamilton, Mercedes, that duo is just too dominant, and I don't see Red Bull making enough progress to really go out there and properly challenge them week in, week out to have a shot at the Drivers' Championship for Verstappen. He's going to go out there, break the record. I think he'll do so with a handful of races to go. If I'm going to pick one here, because I think that's something fun that we can add in here, I'll say he clinches it at Mexico City. So in the 19th Grand Prix, 5th last race of the season. So I guess with 4 more to go, if you want to put it that way, because it would be at the end of that race. I think that he's just on another planet, and he's just been so good over this entire generation with Mercedes. I just don't see anybody being able to go up there and genuinely challenge him and bring it all the way down to that final date unless he's a teammate. And I don't see Valtteri Bottas breaking back through and contending for that at all this season. I think Bottas is going to be pretty firmly in third there. I think Verstappen's going to go back up and grab second in the championship this year. And then Perez might get in the conversation for third myself, but I think that there's going to be a bit of a gap there, and Bottas might be in a little bit of no man's land this year. But I think that Red Bull will close the gap slightly. It won't be as dominant as it was last year, but it's still going to be extremely dominant for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes here.
I'll say that he clinches it in Australia if that is the date that they decide to go to. I think it's going to come down to the third to last race. I think the Mercedes is not as great around Brazil, so I could see Verstappen maybe winning that race. So then it would maybe prolong that just one extra weekend. But then
where
Mercedes
did he clinch it last year? It was Portugal, right? Or was it Imola? I can't remember.
Was it that early in the season?
Was that? Where did he, or did he?
Turkey.
Sorry. I got the wins record mixed up. Sorry.
Yeah.
So he got the wins record at Portugal, and then he clinched it at Turkey. So he clinched it with 3 more races to go. So when you extrapolate that over a 23 race season, you're looking at about 5th or 6th race, or 5 or 6 races to go versus the last year's results. I think that they'll shrink it a little bit and make it like go an extra race weekend.
Yeah, I think it's going to be closer this season, so I think they're going to go an extra 2 race weekends there. I think it's going to be a really good championship battle, in my opinion.
Hey, you know what? I'll say for everything here, I hope that you're right for all of this because it would make it a much more entertaining season at the top end. I think regardless, no matter what you predict, the mid-pack is going to be so much fun to watch once again. But I'm hoping for the sake of the top end and race wins this year that you are correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here to appeal to the fans at home. So
nice.
I'll go with the, as much, Lewis Hamilton deserves the amount of respect that he has absolutely gotten over the past.
He's one of the top
seasons
3 drivers of all time, probably, if not the best. And if he goes out and wins this championship, if everything goes according to plan, he will, with relative ease. I won't say easily. Last year was easily. I don't think it'll be that easy this year. But assuming he goes out and gets that record championship, he's cementing himself in that top 2, arguably best driver of all time. And obviously it's impossible to compare between eras, but we can do our best. And he's just been nothing short of remarkable this entire decade plus. Since he stepped into an F1 car, he's been one of the top drivers in the sport. And we need to remember to cherish every moment of it. We kind of came to that realization last year as the record started to fall. And for all we know, this is the last season for Lewis Hamilton. He's only on a 1-year contract. If he wins that record championship, he could go say, you know what, I'm done after this. I don't want to deal with the new car. I don't want to deal with any of that. George Russell take the throne, take the lineage, I guess, with the British theme there, and let it go on. But I think even if it is whether it's a dominant season, whether it's a close season, whether he doesn't win it at all, we need to cherish and really appreciate every moment Lewis Hamilton's on track, especially this year.
Absolutely. He has 95 career wins, Kyle. Do you want to take a guess on where he might win that 100th career victory? No one's ever done it in Formula One history.
I love that. Let me pull up the schedule once again. If you have it in front of you, you can go ahead and take that one first.
Okay, so we have obviously Bahrain to start the season. Then we got Imola, then Portugal, Spain, Monaco. So that's your first 5 races of the season. I don't think he'll win all 5. So I think it would be fitting for him to win it in Canada if it were to happen. I think in the 7th race of the season, I think he'll get his 5th win of the season by then. And I'll say Lewis Hamilton gets it done. If Canada does happen, I think he can get it done on the best side of the world here in Canada, in Montreal. So I think he gets it done there. It would be full circle, right? His first career victory there.
Yeah,
and everything.
So he's at 95 right now. So he needs 5 wins to do it. We see year in, year out, Bottas starts the season strong. I think Red Bull will come out of the gates strong as well. So I'll push it a little bit more, and I'll have it as storybook as you can possibly have it. Win number 100 at Silverstone, British Grand Prix. 10th race of the season, maybe bumps up to 9th, depending on what happens with the Canadian Grand Prix or some of the others there this season. But I'll say he does it. A bit of a back and forth to start the season, but I'll say he gets win number 5, win number 100 for his career, race 10, the British Grand Prix.
All right, I like it. I don't know how many poles he has. I think it's like 97 or 98 right now.
I mean, we can find it quickly here. Let's. I'm already on the Wikipedia page. Let's see.
He's so close.
Mercedes here. Let's see. Pole position's 98.
Okay, so
where do we want to say? I'll say he gets it at Portugal.
Okay, I'll say Spain then, just for Spain.
Okay.
I'll go Spain. I don't know, but yeah, that's just a fun little thing to do because we did it with a couple of other things with the Xfinity Series and whatnot for Kyle Busch's like big wins for a 100. Yeah. It's basically the equivalent here in Lewis Hamilton, so it is what it is. But yeah, that'll do it for. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Kyle, thanks. I thought you were gonna sneak that by me. Yeah,
I almost did.
I'll be honest.
I
was looking at a notification on my phone, so you almost snuck it by me.
I'm just kidding. Of course not. That would just be that's even too extreme for my level.
Yeah, that would be mental.
Yeah, that does it for the constructors, driver standings, and all the superlatives for the season. All those predictions are done and dusted. Any final thoughts before we wrap up the F1 season preview, Kyle?
I just can't wait. This is I've obviously been a fan of F1 for a handful of years now, but I think this is the first year where I'm really going in with this much knowledge, actually paying this much attention in the preseason. In past years, it's been like a secondhand thing in terms of like my sports priority list or whatever you want to look at it as, is something where if kind of the times worked out and it was like a 9 a.m. start time or later, something like that, and it's already like a reasonable time to wake up, then I'd get up and kind of watch a Grand Prix. But this year, looking at it, even the second half of last year was starting to become this more, but with the help of series like Drive to Survive, I've just become more and more of an F1 fan, and I'm super, super excited for this upcoming season. So it's a season where, depending on how time zones and everything go with all the races, I'm hoping to watch most of the schedule live, which is usually something I don't really say. It's usually a lot more race replays, race recaps, that kind of stuff. Very difficult for yourself in your time zone. It's much difficult, except for those Asian races, which are late night versus early morning for me. But outside of those, it's a lot rougher for you. So I completely understand you just watching the recaps. It won't be
long before I get there, but if I have to watch at least half of the calendar on the West Coast time, so be it. Like, it is what it is.
Hey, you know what? Maybe we can have some like early morning breakfast or something like that, depending on how things go. But
dude, I'll just be finishing my dinner by the time some of these things start, basically.
But no, I'm super, super excited for this season. Drive to Survive coming this weekend.
Yes.
Get you in the mood for the whole season. And then we're at Bahrain to start, of all places, which is going to be fun as well, because it's not the Australian time zone and is chaos way late at night / early in the morning. So very much looking forward to this F1 season.
Absolutely. Lights out in less than a week and a half time. We will potentially do something with fantasy Formula One. We talked about that a little bit over the offseason.
The F1 fantasy format. I'm going to look into it, and hopefully we can do something like that just to help preview race weekends a little bit more, because there's only so much you can do preview-wise every week for an F1 race. It's fairly straightforward, except for some of the technical stuff. But 23 races on the calendar this year. Fingers crossed we can get back to Gilles Villeneuve, because that's my favorite circuit, arguably in the world. I love that thing so much. So much good racing there. And it's a damn shame we haven't got a high-level event there in basically over a year until we get to that point. So fingers crossed we get there. But yeah, what a season we'll have on our hands.
I'm looking forward to it. This was a lot of fun. It's one of the last season previews that we're going to be able to do.
I can't think of any others that we might have. IndyCar when it comes around.
We'll see on that one.
Depending on how the timing works there, because it might come up. I can't remember when the season opener is, but it might come up through like exam period kind of thing, and might overlap.
School may come as a priority at that point in time, but
we'll see. We might have to do like the season preview one race into the season, because there is a bit of a gap between first and second. Anyways, all that being said, season previews are fun. Season predictions are fun. This was another fun one, and I can't wait for the season in a week and a half.
Absolutely. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at The Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We really appreciate it. All the links to our social channels be in the description of the video. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman. Signing off for now. We will talk to you a little bit later this week to get you set up for the upcoming race weekend for NASCAR in Atlanta.